This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. I'm Sophie Ikenye. Our top stories. 5 years with no substantial rainfall, we visit a region in South Africa where the temperature is rising at 5 times the global average.
If this drought persists for another 2 years, I don't think there are going to be many people left here.
Also in the program, coming out stronger, Tanzanian billionaire Mohamed Dewji tells the BBC how he's come back from despair after his kidnap ordeal.
At times when they were threatening me with putting the gun in my head, and I would say, you know, and I will kill you, and I'm like, you know, you can kill me, because, you know, it gets to a point where you snap.
Homecoming, we hear from the African Americans going to Ghana and planning to stay. And in sports, we are in great fear and danger. 4 Eritrean footballers who disappeared from their hotel in Uganda say they are scared for their lives. Thanks for joining us on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. South Africa has imposed emergency measures and is declaring several regions as disaster areas. It's in response to the worst drought in living memory. Now, some areas have gone without substantial rainfall for up to 5 years. The country is prone to drought, but inland temperatures in southern Africa are now rising at twice the global average as a result of climate change. Our correspondent Andrew Harding sent this report.
In a lonely corner of South Africa, a small town is starting to wonder if it has a future.
No water.
It hasn't rained here, not properly, for 5 years now. And the local dam is, well, ask the fish. There have been droughts here before, but none this ruthless. The suffering is stark. A gift of hay may save these cattle, but it comes too late for half the herd.
I've lost 9 cattle, not only myself.
9 dead.
9 dead.
From starvation?
From starvation, from drought.
This vast region depends on farming.
Not much left over here, and this is from 5 years of drought.
But even the biggest farms are being pushed towards the brink.
If this drought persists for another 2 years, I don't think there are going to be many people left here.
In town, a local charity hands out bottled water, but it's hardly a long-term solution. Who do you blame?
Who else but the government? Who else but the government?
You think they should have planned for this?
They should have made a plan. They knew this is going to happen.
Normally it sort of stays at about...
The local authorities say they've tried. They've dug wells, enough to keep some water flowing some of the time. But this has been a wake-up call.
I was very sceptical about it, almost saying it will never happen to us, but it's happened, and it's really happened. And what we're seeing here now is part of climate change. And people are just going to have to, even in the countries where they get lots of water, they've got to start realizing that the situation is changing drastically.
The reason what's happening here today matters to all of us is because this region is currently warming up at about twice the global average, 2 degrees already, perhaps 5 or 6 degrees within a matter of decades, which means that what we're seeing here today is, if you like, a glimpse into the future, and it's not looking promising.
The lessons from here are urgent and familiar. Plan earlier, adapt faster. Andrew Harding, BBC News in Graaff-Reinet, South Africa.
Well, joining me now from Geneva is Philippe Lucio from the World Meteorological Organization. Thanks for taking time to talk to us on Focus on Africa. Now, local authorities there say that this is a wake-up call, but it appears this drought was inevitable. What can South Africa do right now?
Well, thank you for having me. First of all, it is very important that governments make use of the knowledge we have, scientific knowledge we have, to predict from the next minute to a week in terms of weather forecasts, but also in terms of climate predictions from 2 weeks to a month, from a month to a year, from a year to a decade. And so with that information, different activities can be implemented by governments.
Is there anything they can do now about the drought in South Africa specifically?
Yes, certainly. If the drought is predicted, there are very specific measures that can be taken by government. For example, those could consist in, for example, improving drought management, adopting different types of crops depending on the quality of the rainy season, but also making sure that information supports effective decision in those economic areas which might be affected by drought. So there could have been different measures that government could have taken if they had had access to effective climate predictions.
Felipe, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has been quoted as saying, for Africa, climate change is not a remote prospect. It is a crisis now. Now, you recently were on a mission to Mozambique and Zimbabwe. What were your discussions like? What does the future look like in terms of how to mitigate disasters of the kind?
We've heard and we know that climate change would mean increasing frequencies and magnitudes of extreme events. And that was visible in the case of Tropical Cyclone Idai that hit Mozambique in March this year. But what is even more alarming is the level of preparedness of governments, of communities and individuals to deal with these extreme events. In the case of Tropical Cyclone Idai, there was, I would say, a little appreciation by people of the risk the tropical cyclone represented. There were warnings being issued from the 8th of March when the tropical cyclone made landfall on the 14th. Despite the warnings, we still had more than 600 people dead. So there is a need of taking into account these warnings and adopting appropriate measures to make sure that the impact on people, on business and socioeconomic development can be minimized.
When you look at the continent generally, is there a will by governments to even try to deal with these situations or even mitigate whatever might happen in future?
There is certainly a will, and we've worked with governments. The World Meteorological Organization is the mandated UN organizations on weather, climate and water. We've worked with governments to support their efforts in strengthening their capabilities for monitoring and predicting weather and climate and water. And we see more and more efforts in putting together contingency plans, but also strengthening national institutions which can provide information in terms of risk, analyzing the danger that different hazards represent, the potential impact of those hazards, but also putting in place effective early warning systems which can warn people of impending hazards. But those cannot be put overnight. They're efforts which need to be continued. And unfortunately, Africa so far has seen little or moderate progress in terms of the requirements for having effective early warning system. For example, Africa is the continent which has the biggest number of silent stations, observing stations, which are critical for understanding what's happening in terms of weather and climate, but also...
There's a lot, still a lot to be done by the continent. Felipe Lucio, thank you very much indeed for taking time to talk to us on Focus on Africa. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Now, Ethiopia says more than 400 people have been arrested on suspicion of involvement in last week's deadly clashes in the Oromia region. Nearly 80 people died during 3 days of violent unrest triggered when a prominent Oromo activist, Jawar Mohammed, accused the government of wanting to remove his security without notifying him. The Prime Minister's office says investigations are ongoing. Now, 1 year ago, Tanzanian billionaire Mohamed Dewji was kidnapped outside a hotel gym in the country's main city, Dar es Salaam. He was kept captive for 9 days in an ordeal that prompted a huge manhunt. He was eventually released. Mr. Dewji spoke to me for the first time in detail about his experience and his motivation for philanthropy.
It was just very random, you know. I got picked up at 5 o'clock, 5:20 at the gym. Just unknown people. I mean, they definitely were not Tanzanians. There was some South Africans and some Mozambicans. And they just kidnapped me for 9 days. They blindfolded me. They tied my hands and my legs, and they kept on threatening me with guns on my head, and it was a very, very crazy ordeal. But I have to say that I've come out very strong from it. One, I'm very thankful to people that prayed for me.
Let's talk a bit about that ordeal, because you mentioned South Africans, Mozambicans.
Yes.
So did you actually know who they were?
So actually what happened, there was an investigation by the police, and one driver who was a Tanzanian has been prosecuted, is behind bars, and he had mentioned that there were some South Africans and some Mozambicans that kind of pretty much crossed the border and ran away. And now they're under the Interpol watch. So basically, that's how I know.
What do they want? I mean, obviously, when you're in that room, I suppose
Yes.
they're asking you and threatening you, and there's something they're demanding. What do they want?
Wanted money. They wanted money, and in the end, it was very interesting. They left me without me paying $1.
So you didn't negotiate, you didn't meet their demands at all?
They were, the first time they told me they needed money. The second call, they said, okay, you know, I told them, look, I'm incapacitated. You know, my eyes are closed, my legs are tied. Why don't you get hold of my family member? And then, you know, so obviously nobody from my family I knew while I was kidnapped that was in touch with them, because obviously they would want to know I'm still alive.
How did you cope those 9 days? What kept you going?
It was faith. I was just praying. I mean, I was actually praying a lot. Being a Muslim, I was repenting. I was asking for forgiveness. I was trying to block thinking about my kids, because that would make me cry. It was a very, very difficult situation at times when they were threatening me with putting the gun in my head, and I would say, you know, and I will kill you, and I'm like, you know, you can kill me, because, you know, it gets to a point where you snap, you know. Your legs are tied, your hands are tied.
So did they feed you?
They fed me. During the day, my hands were tied like this, and I would have to eat like that. And during the night, your hands are tied here. It's such a simple thing. Imagine you want to itch here. How would you itch? You know, it's the small things in life that you start appreciating, you know. So in general, it was a very difficult ordeal, but I've come out very strong, and it's all people's prayers and the faith in God.
When do you feel most at peace?
I think, you know, now, I think before the ordeal that I felt that I wasn't very content, and I was running this rat race of, you know, making more and more money, etc., etc. And now what has life done to me is made me pause and realize all the other important things. Yes, being around my children, it gives me a lot of contentment.
Well, you're a billionaire,
yes.
And one of the biggest #1 points for them is you put money where you know you get some back.
Right.
What is that thing that makes you just give away without?
You know, I'll tell you
of...
something, my dear. Life is very, very short, and you know, we are not going to take anything away with us. And the last thing you want to do is just leave all these billions and billions for your children. I think it is our responsibility. I believe, I'm a very religious person, and I believe that some of us that have been blessed with wealth are ambassadors, and that we need to give this money and redistribute this money. But mind you, redistributing it with having the maximum impact. So you look at it from an entrepreneur's point of view. It's you bank for a buck. For every dollar that I spend, what is the return I'm getting in terms of how many lives I'm touching?
Africa's youngest billionaire and Tanzanian billionaire Mohamed Dewji there. Let's now take a quick look at other stories making headlines across Africa and the rest of the world. Facebook says it suspended 3 networks of Russian accounts for trying to influence politics in Africa. And the social media giant said the networks used fake and compromised accounts to target users in 8 countries where elections had recently been held, including Mozambique, DRC, and Ivory Coast. Ethiopia has agreed to US-led mediation talks to resolve differences with Egypt over the construction of the Grand Renaissance Dam. Egypt, which relies on the Nile for 19% of its water, is worried that the dam will greatly affect its water supply. This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. Still to come in sports, South Africa make one change for Saturday's Rugby World Cup final against England as Cheslin Colby returns. I'm Sophie Ikenye and you're watching Focus on Africa from BBC World News. Let's find out what's happening in the world of sport now. Peter?
Many thanks, Sophie. Now, South Africa have made just one change for Saturday's Rugby World Cup final against England. Cheslin Kolbe returns after recovering from the ankle injury that kept him out of the semi-final win over Wales. Kolbe replaces Sbu Nkosi after recovering from that ankle injury. Now, Siya Kolisi will captain South Africa for the 20th time as he becomes just the 8th player in the 23-man squad to have won 50 caps.
Yeah, it's definitely been frustrating, especially coming through the pool stages and then getting injured against Italy, probably the last few seconds of the game. But I've been healed and I've been training with the team for the past 2 weeks, so I'm really confident as a player. I'm back to my old self, and the ankle is really healed up nicely. And yeah, I'm just grateful to get another opportunity to wear the green and gold jersey, and especially playing in the final.
Now, 4 Eritrean footballers who disappeared from their hotel in Uganda's southwestern city of Jinja earlier this month have told the BBC they are in great fear and great danger.
Hello, we are the football players, the Eritrean football players from Uganda, seeking for an emergency help.
The players were part of the Eritrean squad at the regional Sekafa Under-20 Challenge Cup tournament in Uganda. They say threats have been made against them online for abandoning the team and feared they might be kidnapped and forcefully returned to Eritrea. The disappearance of Eritrean players during international tournaments is quite common. Now, freestyle football is gaining a huge following across the world, and just recently, the 2019 African Freestyle Football Championships ended in Nigeria, with Abdul Titi Kone from Ivory Coast winning the top prize. Some of the talent and skills on display would have left some of the professional footballers green with envy. Egypt's Yusuf Ayman Riesco is one of the best freestylers in Africa and takes us through his bag of tricks.
Freestyle for me is lifestyle. For me, it's my job, it's my hobby, it's my sport, it's everything for me.
Yusuf started freestyle when he was 14.
I was watching Ronaldinho, so I started to do the same tricks he's doing. I discovered there is another world called freestyle football, not just the normal football we see.
Like most children in Egypt, Yusuf wanted to be a footballer, but he fell in love with freestyle instead.
When I started freestyle, many people didn't understand what I'm doing. They said, "Okay, this is not going to help you in the field, like playing football." But now, after this many years, I am glad that I dedicated to this. I became a champion of Egypt. I traveled more than 30 countries around the world, and I'm a professional freestyler now.
Such is the growth of the sport in Africa that a freestyle championship has been initiated on the continent. Every year, professional freestylers go head-to-head at the African Freestyle Championship in Lagos, Nigeria. The African Freestyle Championship pits 24 reigning champions of each country in Africa. The format for the tournament is a series of head-to-head battle, with each battle lasting 3 minutes. In that time frame, each freestyler will have 30-second rounds in which to impress the judges. At the rapid rate of its growth, There have been debates as to if freestyle should make it into the Olympics.
Freestyle football is a serious sport, and it's a sport itself. It's not related to soccer, to football, or to any other sport. So it just takes time, and we will be there for sure.
Juliet Mafua reporting there. Now, finally, is this the most bizarre yellow card in a football game ever? A referee made an unusual intervention during a match in Haifa, Israel, between a Brazil side featuring World Cup winners from 1994 and 2002 and Israeli veterans. Former AC Milan star Kaká was on the ball when the official brought play to a sudden stop and showed the 37-year-old a yellow card for no apparent reason. It turned out it was a ruse to steal a selfie with the player. Great stuff. You want a selfie with me?
I knew you'd say something like that, Peter. No, but thanks. Now, Ghana has declared 2019 the year of return and is encouraging the African diaspora to visit the country. There was a 20% increase in the number of Americans visiting from January to June this year, and some have made the continent their new home. Elaine Okere reports from Accra.
This year marks 400 years since enslaved Africans were first taken to what is now the US. Ghana has declared 2019 the year of return and is encouraging the African diaspora to visit the country. Angela Matthews, who is from California, is one of thousands of Americans who have made the journey.
I never thought I would make this trip, never. My sister and I are the first generation to make it here. And it's just truly amazing.
Cape Coast Castle was a major hub for the transatlantic slave trade. Angela decided to visit after a DNA test revealed she has Ghanaian ancestry.
And thank you and gratitude to every ancestor of my bloodline. Thank you for being strong enough to make it.
In our country, back in the United States, with our current president, it's significant to know where you belong and where you came from. Reuniting with my ancestors makes me feel at home. It makes me feel that I'm a part of a culture that I never experienced. I have a culture, I have a people, I belong.
But for some African Americans, a visit to Ghana is not enough.
Go into Africa.
5 years ago, Lakeisha Ford arrived in the country to start a new life. She joined a number of African Americans who have emigrated to the continent.
Any Black person that is in the diaspora, a trip needs to be made to the African continent. There's almost this like undefined closure that happens. You didn't even know you needed this. You don't even know you need closure in a certain light, but coming here, you get it.
But not everyone is enthusiastic about the year of return. Ghanaian DJ Vim Timms is worried about who it will benefit.
I hope it's going to be a good year, but I also think if they don't put structures together well, it will be a year of return with just fun, and then they won't just go home with any messages.
But for Lakeisha, the year is about changing people's perceptions.
This move is not about racism. This move is about the progress and the future, which is Africa. I don't see color here because I'm a part of the majority. And I think that's a privilege and a luxury. That description as a Black woman in Ghana. There's no such thing like you are a woman in Ghana.
Authorities estimate 500,000 people will visit Ghana this year, but it's hard to tell what impact this will have on the future of the country. Elaine Otry, BBC News, Accra.
Well, don't forget, you can get in touch with me and some of the team on social media at Kenya. Well, that's Focus on Africa for now. Thank you for your company. Bye.